Hi there! Welcome back to the next episode of Fairy Tale Nails. Today's story and nail design is Little Red Riding Hood. I feel like when I was a kid, this story wasn't as dark and morbid as I find it now. Fairy tales aren't really meant for children, are they? This is the original story of Little Red Riding Hood. Hope you enjoy and don't have nightmares. Once upon a time, there was a little girl who lived with her mother in a cottage on the edge of a large forest. Her grandmother, who doted on her, had made her, for her birthday, a red velvet bonnet with a tunic to match to wear over her dresses. The child liked the costume so much that she wore it every day wherever she went, until her real name was altogether forgotten, and everyone who knew her called her Little Red Riding Hood instead. One day, when she was playing in the garden, her mother called her and told her that she had just baked a cake, which she would like Little Red Riding Hood to take with a bottle of wine to her grandmother, who had fallen ill and had to stay in bed. "As your grandmother is all alone in her house in the forest," she said, "she will be glad of your company, and this cake and wine will do her good. Tell her I shall come myself a little later, when I am less busy." She wrapped the cake in a cloth and laid it carefully beside the bottle of wine in a basket. "Now see to it," she admonished, "that you don't stray off the path, and don't on any account talk to strangers." Little Red Riding Hood dearly loved her grandmother, so she took the basket and set off eagerly, very proud to be entrusted with such an important errand. She was not often allowed to go so far from her home alone, and heeding what her mother had said, kept close to the path, taking care not to stumble over the sticks and stones as she ran along, humming a little tune to herself. She looked very pretty with the ribbons of her red bonnet flying out above her long flaxen hair, and around her waist a blue sash, the same color as the dress that peeped out beneath her beloved red tunic. She had to slow down when she reached the forest itself, where the trees grew thicker and the path more winding, and it was there that she met the wolf. She had never heard of a wolf, and certainly never seen one, and having no notion of his evil cunning, was not the least bit frightened of him. It didn't enter her head that anyone would want to harm such a little thing as herself anyway. "Good morning," said the wolf. "What a pretty Red Riding Hood you're wearing." The child was so pleased to hear this that she immediately forgot that her mother had said about not talking to strangers. She had always been a friendly little girl. "Yes, isn't it?" she replied. "My granny made it for my birthday. She is ill in bed, and I am on my way to visit her." "And what have you got in your basket, Little Red Riding Hood?" the wolf inquired politely. "A cake my mother baked and some wine, and we hope it will make Granny feel better." She held out the basket so the wolf could have a peek inside. "Where does your grandmother live, Little Red Riding Hood?" asked the wolf. "She lives in the cottage next to the 3 oak trees in the middle of the forest." "What a tasty little creature she does look," the wolf thought to himself, unable to keep his hungry eyes off the child. "How I'd like to eat her up this very minute, but if I'm clever, I shall be able to have both her and her grandmother in for my lunch today." So he walked along beside Little Red Riding Hood, making amiable conversation about the beautiful morning, and what a lucky little girl she was to be visiting her grandmother, while what he was really up to was trying to think of a way of delaying her so that he could reach the grandmother's house before Little Red Riding Hood did. Suddenly, an idea came to him, and he said, "Oh, look at those lovely ripe strawberries over there, and all those flowers growing under the trees. Wouldn't it be nice if you pick some to take to your grandmother?" Little Red Riding Hood needed no persuading. She was usually an obedient little girl, but she at once forgot her other promises to her mother not to leave the path. The sunlight filtered through the trees seemed to beckon to her, and all the berries and the flowers looked so tempting that she simply had to pick some. Waving goodbye to the wolf, she disappeared into the forest. Meanwhile, the wolf wasted no time. With a leap and a bound, he made straight off to the grandmother's cottage by a short cut, and was soon knocking at the door. "Who's there?" the old lady called out feebly from her bed. "It's Little Red Riding Hood. Granny dear, I've brought you a cake and some wine," said the wolf, trying to imitate the little girl's high-pitched squeaky voice. "Let yourself in, my dear," replied grandmother. "I am too weak to get up. Just lift the latch." The wolf quickly opened the door, took a stealthy look around the room. Then, in one great spring, he leaped up onto the grandmother's bed, and before she could let out so much as a whimper, gobbled her up, nightclothes and all. In a few greedy swallows, feeling somewhat less ravenous, he bounded across to a chest on the corner, where he rummaged until he found another of the old lady's neatly folded nightgowns and caps. Slipping these on, he hastily drew the curtains to make the room a shade darker, scrambled back into the bed, and crouched down low between the sheets. Little Red Riding Hood lost all thought of the time as she darted about picking flowers and berries. The ripe strawberries, red as her bonnet, looked so enticing that she popped almost as many into her mouth as she did into her basket. As for the flowers, there were so many that she scarcely knew which to choose, so she ran from one spot to another, trying to pick as many different colors as possible. It was only when she had gathered as many as her basket and hands could hold that she remembered her errand. By now, she had wandered so deep into the forest that she had to heed her step through the tangled brush a little more carefully on the way back. And there were still things to distract her. A bushy-tailed squirrel didn't seem to mind such a little girl watching him bury a nut, then smooth the earth over his hiding place with his skillful paws. And what child could have resisted chasing the prettiest orange speckled yellow butterfly until it had fluttered out of reach? Or not stop to cock an eye with an ear at the woodpecker tapping his sharp bill against the bark of a tree. Even when she was back once more on the familiar path, she still couldn't help dawdling a little. To watch a bird flapping its wings overhead, or hopping about underfoot, to sniff at her bunch of white, yellow, blue, red, and purple wildflowers. But eventually, she reached her grandmother's cottage and knocked at the door. "Who's there?" called the wolf, trying this time to imitate the old lady's voice. "It's Little Red Riding Hood, Granny dear. I brought you some cake my mother baked for you and some wine to make you better. I picked some flowers and berries for you in the forest." "Lift the hatch and come right in, dear," the wolf called back as gently as he could. He had become rather impatient and cross as he waited, thinking that perhaps he had been altogether too wily for his own good, and that the little girl was going to cheat him of the juiciest part of his lunch by not coming. Little Red Riding Hood did as she was told and easily lifted the simple latch. She always enjoyed coming to see her grandmother, but now, as she crossed the threshold into the cottage, she suddenly felt disquiet without really knowing why. Hesitating a moment, she squinted her eyes around the darkened room, surprised that her grandmother should want to keep the curtains closed and shut out the sparkling sunshine, which would surely cheer her up if she wasn't feeling well. Setting down her basket and the flowers, she tiptoed gingerly over to the large bed and was just about to give her grandmother a kiss as usual when she drew back a step with an uneasy start. "Why, Granny," she exclaimed, wonderingly, "what big ears you have!" All the better to hear you with, my dear," came the reply. The old lady's voice sounded rather croaky, but Little Red Riding Hood thought she must have a cold. It was something much stranger about her grandmother that made her peer even more anxiously at the bed. "Why, Granny, what big eyes you have." "All the better to see you with, my dear." The child's own eyes were by now almost as round as a small owl's. "Why, Granny, what enormous hands you have." "All the better to hold you with, my dear." And oh, Granny, what terrible big teeth you have." "All the better to eat you with, my dear." And with these ominous words, the wolf reached out his great claws, grabbed hold of Little Red Riding Hood, and gobbled her up in no time at all. Licking his thick lips after such tender mouthful, feeling very bloated indeed after such a sumptuous meal, he then stretched himself out to his full length on the bed, settled his head comfortably back on the pillow, and was soon sound asleep, snoring loudly enough to shake the rafters. A short while afterwards, a huntsman, gun swinging from his shoulder, happened to pass that way. Thinking that something must be seriously wrong with the old lady to make her snore so loudly, he rapped on the door in case she should be in need of help. And when there was no answer, he too lifted the latch and let himself into the cottage. A few long strides brought him to the foot of the bed, where he was nearly startled out of his wits to discover the wolf lying there in the old lady's stead. "You old rogue," he muttered to himself. "So, I've got you at last. I've been on your tail long enough." And he whipped the gun off his shoulder and shot the wolf dead. It was only then that the huntsman noticed not only that the wolf was wearing the old lady's nightclothes, but how fat he looked bulging there under the counterpane. "So that's where she is," he guessed out loud. And there, being no sign of the old lady anywhere else, he pulled his hunting knife from his satchel and slit up the wolf's stomach from end to end. And out tumbled the old lady and Little Red Riding Hood, both of them still alive, although stiff from being so cramped, and obviously shaken by their frightening experience. It wasn't long, however, before the two of them recovered. The huntsman sat the old lady in an armchair and wrapped a blanket around her. But once she had eaten 2 slices of cake and drunk a glass full of the wine, she declared she didn't need fussing over any more, and was well enough to get dressed. And dress herself she did, in her best pink dress, as if she were giving a party. And it really is like a party, Little Red Riding Hood thought, nibbling at the cake she was sharing with her grandmother and the huntsman. The porch of the cottage bloomed gaily with flowers, none brighter than her own posies arranged in the handsome pink bowl. No one had scolded her, and when the huntsman slung the wolf over his shoulder and waved goodbye, she felt she had made a new friend. But you can be sure that she never left the path or spoke to a stranger again. The end. The next episode and nail design will be Hansel and Gretel. I really hope you enjoyed this episode and nail design. I feel like I'm slowly catching on to how to create videos with the timing and music all syncing up properly, and I am loving reading these old stories again. If you have a favorite fairy tale, please tell me about it in the comments below. I am in a pretty intense competition with my sweetheart, who is avoiding telling his subscribers who I am, just so that he can get ahead. The competition is for whoever can get to the first 1,000 subscribers. It's free for you, but pretty cool prizes for whoever wins. He has already had a year plus of practice and videos going on, so I'm starting a couple hundred subscribers behind. But I think we can do it. Again, thank you so much for watching. I can't wait to see what new nail designs we come up with for the next story. And I'll see you there. Thanks, guys.